Hello. In the Society for Creative Anachronism, my name is the Honorable Lady Lynn Fairchild. However, many people know me by my nickname of Linnea. For today, I'm going to be discussing with you about different types of Viking hoods, as well as showing you how to draft and sew a very simple Viking hood. But first, on my video, in the bottom right corner, you'll see a subscribe button. Please click subscribe. If you have questions, please enter them into the comments below. For today, we'll be talking about how to sew a Viking hood. First, who were the Vikings? The Vikings were people from Scandinavia from about the late 8th century into the 11th century. They were attributed to being warriors, explorers, traders. Their name comes from the Scandinavian word Vikinger, which literally translates as pirate. However, it is meant to refer to their overseas expeditions, not necessarily being the pirate that we associate with the word today. There were different styles of headwear that varied depending on the century and also where you were located. On the left-hand side, you will see an example of a Jorvik hood, or also known as a Jorvik cap. It could also be called a Dublin hood. The difference between the Jorvik and the Dublin hood was if it was square or rounded on the back side of the head. On the right side of the screen, I'll probably mispronounce this, it's the Skjoldehamn hood. And with this style, this will be the style we'll be covering today. And it's pretty much two rectangles going down the side of the head and the shoulders, with a gore in the front and a gore in the back, and those gores are squares. There's also the London, or the Hedeby, or the, I'll probably also mispronounce this, and please correct me if I do mispronounce this, the Herjolfsness hoods. And these hoods specifically had, instead of gores in the front, they had them on the sides. And also those gores tended to be, they were rounded rather than the previous hood that ended in a point for the gore. On the right-hand side of the screen is an example of the Boxton or the Lirapipe hood. So what types of fabric can you use? For the Jorvik cap, that was from around the 9th or the 10th century, and that hood was made of silk. It had linen ties on it, and it was coif-like and specifically meant for women to wear. And the other finds, like this, I'll probably mispronounce this, the Skjoldehamn find, the Hedeby find, and in the Hrolfsnifs find, you had wool or twill. And this went from the 9th century on into the 14th century. This is also evident with the Boxton hood from the 14th century that was also made of wool. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see an example of one of the hoods from about 1400. What colors should you use? In the Skjoldehamn, the original color was dark brown with the warp of dark gray, and the weft was a lighter gray. In the wool fragments found at Berka, which is from about the 9th or 10th century, they had dark blue, dark brown, and reddish brown wools. Now, how do you cut the fabric? In the pattern we'll be using today, it's from the Skjoldehamn. The pattern was made of rectangles and squares, approximately 12 inches to 24 inches wide. Remember the rectangles that I talked about going on the side of the head and the square gore in the front and the back? This is that pattern. The hood is made of 3 pieces of wool, not 4. Because I'll be using scrap fabric in a minute to show you, I'll actually be using 4. It depends on how historically accurate you want to be. If you look on the right-hand side in the picture, and my mouse is not moving, you will see that there is a slit cut in the instead of having two rectangles, you have a large square. And in the picture, it says 2.5 centimeters down. There's a slit cut in the center, and then there's another gap before there's another slit. So it looks like it's two rectangles, but it's actually one large square, making it technically 3 pieces, not 4. So with cutting the fabric, you want to obtain about 1 yard of fabric, and make sure you pre-wash the fabric in case there's any shrinkage. And when you cut the fabric, make sure to allow for seam allowances. And with the pattern, like I said, instead of 2 separate rectangles, it has 1.5 inch gap in the top and then a slit in the middle. It could be 9.5 to 12.5 inches depending on how wide you are making your hood. About 1 inch gap underneath that, and then another slit, which is where it will be split apart for the square gore in the front to go. And here are some examples of with stitching the hood together. The picture on the left-hand side is what the hood will look like when it's laying flat on its side. The square will fold in and look like a triangle shape, or from the top, a diamond shape. On the right-hand side, it gives you another example of what it looks like with the rectangles going down the side, the face slit in the middle, and then the back side will just be stitched up, and then the square gore in the front, and then another in the back. Finishing the edges. And the Skjoldehamn, the bottom edge was whip stitched with orderly stitches that ran parallel to the fabric grain, and they found that the hem was not folded over. In the picture, there's an example of a whip stitch. In the same find, the face hole had an oblique basting stitch that was first done in red and then finished in yellow. And here's just my works cited page if you have any questions or want to visit some of the websites mentioned earlier in this PowerPoint. If you're making a Viking hood, then chances are you'll probably be making a Viking ensemble. And with that, I recommend visiting, and if I mispronounce her name, please let me know and correct me, Hilda Thuman, it's Thunem, and her website I have found to be very informational. And as you scroll through, you'll see down here she's got information about hose and socks. And then from here, they're separated depending on if you want to look at the Birka site, the Skjolde site, York, different things. But then she goes through and shows you pictures of what the finds look like, descriptions. Here's some pictures from, it looks like, from the woolen sock that was found at Coppergate in York. And here are some more socks. This is just one example. On her site, she also has information about oval brooches, apron dresses, the underdress, pants for men. It's very informational. I highly recommend going to her website. Here are some tidbits of information that I forgot to include in the presentation. The Jorvik or Dublin caps or hoods are from Western Scandinavia, from Norway, Iceland, and the British Isles. They are based on the findings at the Coppergate excavation. If you hear reference to Hedeby, that's based on the findings in Hedeby, Denmark. And Boxton, that is named after the Boxton Bogman, who was found and based on testing dates back to about 14th century in Sweden, and he is actually on display in the Varberg County Museum. Here's an example of the hood that we will be making today. Well, sort of. This was my first time making this hood, and as you can see, first there is no seam up here, So I just made it one really long rectangle and folded it over, only learning after the fact that it should have been a square with a slit cut in the middle, well, near the top in the middle for the face, rather than one really long rectangle. And also with this hood, it is made out of wool. It was remnants from an old wool blanket that I made into a hood. But because it's wool, it's itchy and my children don't like it. So for today, I'm going to be using old scraps of linen to make a hood. The linen is less scratchy. For a hood, for an adult, you would want it to be either 24 inches or 30 inches for the square. But since I'm doing this for a child, I'm actually going to make my square 18 by 18 inches. So first I'm going to measure out 18 inches from this side. Now I'm also going to be creating my straight edge so I know where to measure from here to here. Okay, and now I'm going to measure 18 inches from this edge to this edge. And as you can see, I now have the square. Time to cut. Once you have your square cut out, go ahead and place it over to the side. And then for my next fabric, whatever dimension you have, if you're doing 24 inches, a 24 by 24 square, then you want to divide that in half and make it each square 12 by 12 for the gores. If you're doing a 30 by 30 square, then you want 15 inches by 15 inches for your square. And since I'm doing 18 by 18, I want to divide that in half, and so I'm going to be doing a 9 by 9 square. Okay, as you can see, I'm measuring from the edge and I'm measuring 9 inches. And now I'm going to measure from this edge and go up 9 inches. For the second square, you have the option of using your ruler again, or you can use the square that you just cut out to lay it flat and cut right along there. But first, as you can possibly see, the edge of the fabric here is right here, and it's a slightly different shade than the rest of the blue, so I'm going to cut that trim off and pin the fabric in place and cut right along the edge here. For your main square fabric, you want to fold it over so that all of your edge lines match up. Make sure it's nice and flat and straight. So if this were hypothetically a 24 by 24 square, you would measure 1.5 down, and then this is where you would start the slit for the face hole, and you want to count down 9.5. So 9.5 at the 1.5 mark, so 9.5 inches down will be at 11 inches. So this section right here is where you would cut, and then you would want to give yourself another 1.5 inch gap. And then, so from on your ruler from 12.5 down to the edge of your fabric, you would cut another slit, and this section is where the front square gore would go. So again, remember, 1.5 to 11 is where you would cut for the face hole, and then from 12.5 on, that's where the square gore goes. So hypothetically, this is 30 by 30. Then again, you would start at 1.5, so 1.5 inches down. But this time you're going to do 12.5 inches. So you would measure 12.5 inches down from the 1.5 mark. So that would be here. So you start at 1.5 and you go to 14. So that's where you would cut your face slit. And then you would go 1.5 inches to 15.5. And from 15.5 onto the end of your fabric is where you would put your slit in for the square gore for, again, this is for hypothetically if you're doing the 30 by 30. Now, as you may recall, I'm doing 18 by 18, so I have to modify my measurements. And since I'm modifying my measurements for the hood for a kid, I'm going to start off at 1.5 inches. So I'm going to mark my fabric here. And then I need to measure down 6.5 inches. So as you can see, here's 6, here's the halfway mark. And then measure down 1.5 inches. So this section right here will be the face hole, and then from this section on, this is where the front gore square will go. So as you can see, here are my edges. I'm holding the fabric down to make sure I cut right on the fold, and I'm only going to cut up to the pin. Next is the tricky part, trying to cut this little section without cutting the fabric. So what I'm going to do is right here is the fold. Now I'm going to go up to my pin. And now from here I'm going to cut down to this pin. So as I unfold the fabric, I've got a square. Here's the face hole, and then this is where the gore will be. Here's the top, here's the face hole, and then here's where the square gore will be. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure this edge up along here, and you will find you've got a little bit of excess fabric. So I'm going to put this corner together, and then this gives you a little extra seam allowance for when you fold it over when it gets stitched in. So here, corner to corner, fabrics are together. So first I'm going to sew that, and then I'm going to come back and flip this around and sew on that side. Also what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip to the back side And where the face hole is, I'm going to go ahead and roll it over twice to sew up the face hole. So here is the face hole, and what I'm going to do is from here I'm going to fold it over once, and then I'm going to fold it over again, and then pin. And as you can see, I'm doing this very small because this is going to be an unlined hood. So fold it over once, fold it over twice, and pin it in place. The other thing I'm going to pin on is the other square. So I'm going to put it against this corner, and then I'll pin along here, and then to give you a visual, it will then, when it's sewn together, will flip over like that. Now once you have stitched up the face hole and added your squares onto one side of the fabric, like that, now it's time to attach the front square to the other side. So I'll flip that to the back side, and you can see here is the seam, here's the face hole, and now I'm going to sew the square along the other edge. And for the back seam, what you're going to do is take your fabric, and you're going to fold everything in half with the inside seams on the outside. So put corner to corner, fold it like that. And then here's the tricky part. You're going to do corner to corner and pull this and make it a straight line. So this is going to be a straight line right here. So corner to corner, and start pinning. And you want your fabric to be flat and edge to edge. Remember that rectangle that I showed you before with the two triangles on the sides? Here it is. So from here, what I'm going to do, because it's linen, I'm going to go ahead and hem the bottom. So for this, I'm going to fold the fabric over once, and then fold it over a second time. And pin in place. Fold it over once, fold it over twice, pin in place. Now what I like to do is when I get to where there's two fabrics overlapping, I like to fold it like this. So one side on one on the other, and then fold up once and fold up a second time. I find this helps especially when you're using thicker fabrics, because otherwise you'll get a whole bunch of bulk, like I'll show you on this side. If I left everything folded here, and I fold once, fold twice, and now I've got a whole lot of bulk right here. And depending on the needle that you're using, it may not like it, it might break, it may get stuck in the fabric. So that's where I like to split it like that. Now that I'm down here to one of the points, I've already got it folded over once and then twice on the left-hand side here. So I'm going to hold that in place, and then I'm going on the right-hand side here, fold up once, and then fold up a second time, and pin in place. Just like that. Folding over a second time, hold it in place, pin. I'll stick one more pin right here. Okay, time to go sew. And once you're done sewing the hem, go ahead, turn everything right side out. And congratulations, you have made yourself a Viking hood. If you liked my video, I'm going to be working on upcoming videos on how to make a smock as well as how to make an apron dress. So please subscribe and be updated when those videos come out. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know.